What ends up happening specifically in Europe that leads up to the witch trials is that there's a guy named Johannes Neider, and Neider is a well-connected bishop, and he's beginning to get stories from all over Europe where they're arresting women, and women under torture are confessing to various kinds of strange things. And what he does is he puts all of the stories together and says, hold on, they're all part of the same heretical movement. It's not that, prior to this, witchcraft and magic is a sin. Sins are fine. You can get sins forgiven. What you can't get forgiven is heresy. Once you've committed yourself to heresy, you're excommunicated and you can be subject to all kinds of things. What happens is that Neider and eventually Kramer these are two bishops, inquisitorial bishops. They're going to take all these stories and generate basically a conspiracy theory. And the conspiracy theory is the world's about to end. It's always about to end. The world's about to end, and the devil is doing the last big push to outrage God. And the new outrage is there's a new heretical sect. And the heretical sect is led by women who meet in the forest, get naked, fly around, make men's penises disappear. So, of course, the most important thing is dudes' penises. I'm serious. If you look at all these manuals, that's the one thing.
That's what their conspiracy is.
They're like, of all the things, they're like, yeah, they make our penises disappear. It's terrible.
It's
just the most Freudian, castration anxiety thing ever.
It's like a horrible indie film.
It's just like, the magical vanishing penises. Or weather magic, they cause hail and stuff. And the idea is that all of this is now one new heresy. And you can extract this heresy through torture. And the book that really sets this all off is a book called Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of the Witches. And it was written by a psychopath. I mean, the guy that wrote Hammer of the Witches, Kramer, or Institutor, this is his Latin name, he was so crazy. He was sexually infatuated with a couple of women. It's always this sort of weird Ted Bundy type guys that end up in this stuff. But he was so infatuated with the woman, he kept putting her on trial for witchcraft over and over again that the local bishop was like, you have to go away. You have to leave. You're just when the Inquisition tells you that you're being too much, you're out of control. So what does he do? He's like an incel kind of guy, right? He's violent and he hates women. And he goes off and he writes this book, and this book becomes a bestseller, and he writes it right at the time printing is coming online. So what is effectively a screed, because of printing, becomes all the rage, and this really initiates the witch hunts. And, the modern data says that between 40 and 60,000 people, mostly women.
Over what time period? 300 years?
Yeah, so it's beginning about 1450 and ending, some of the witch trials we've won in the 18th century. You have executions in Switzerland that go all the way into the early 18th century, but most of the killing is finished by the late 17th century.
Mainly happening where in Europe?
All over, from Iceland to Russia. So you have the big killings typically happen in places like Scotland and Germany, which is also the areas where you have a lot of religious strife, so where Catholics and Protestants are really at each other's throats, literally. And typically that's a pretty good predictor for when you'll have big outbreaks. But it's a feedback loop, right? I go to a village and say, is anything bad happening here? And the answer is yes, because it's 1580 and you were living in the little ice age, and yeah, it's bad. And you're like, are there any women here who are strange? Talk too much, gossip too much, curse too much, live by themselves, don't go to church enough. Is there a woman like that here? They're like, yeah, her. All right, arrest her. The presumption is that she's guilty, right? And of course, what is the devil? He's the father of lies. So what do? I ask her, are you a witch? And she's like, no. We're going to have to figure this out. And what do? The torture begins. And of course, she will eventually admit it, because everyone will. You torture someone enough. And
what kind of torture?
Typically, so it's funny. It's, we look at the church, we think of, if you've ever been in one of these torture museums, they have all this horrifying stuff for Iron Maidens and stuff. The church had strict rules about torture. It involved, you couldn't draw blood and you couldn't break bones. So typically the torture was strappado, which is where you tie someone's hands behind their back and then lift them into the air. And that, you can imagine that what it does to the shoulders is just terrible. And then they can just bounce you up and down and leave you like that overnight. And
basically trying to get you to confess to something that fits the agenda.
That's the agenda. And typically it's not just confessing, because remember, this is a heresy. Heresies involve more than one person. It's not just the one lady. She's just the weak link. So what do you tell her? If you just tell us the names of the other witches, we'll go easy on you. And then it's a virus. It's a mind virus. It's a conspiracy theory. 1 becomes 3, 3 becomes 6, 6 become 40,000 women. And this goes again from Iceland to Russia. In fact, interestingly enough, Iceland and Russia, the majority of people executed in the documents are men. And it may be examples of old pagan folk practices that were still being practiced in sort of the hinterland of Iceland and Russia and up in Lithuania, where there may have been sort of some surviving paganism stuff kind of lingering, and that got wrapped up into the witch trials as well. So more men were executed in Iceland and Russia than women, which is interesting.
Interesting. So it was largely strange, like perceived strange or isolated women, not necessarily people practicing magic rituals.
No, this is the thing that people often don't understand is that they didn't often target midwives. Midwives were productive members of society. They worked alongside priests and doctors. So it wasn't healer women, typically not, very rarely. The biggest predictor for being accused of witchcraft is poverty. That's the one thing we see across the board. That's the predictor, is poverty. And because again, what they're being accused and convicted of is being members of a heretical sect. Sorcery is still a sin, and men are practicing sorcery all the time at this time. So now you can still get in a lot of trouble for that. But you have Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly talking to angels and revealing all kinds of angelic language stuff. You have Agrippa writing 3 books of occult philosophy. You have tons of men at some level publicly engaging in sorcery. Faust, Paracelsus, they're living in the height of the witch trials. And they're more or less able to exist with some problems. I mean, John Dee was invited by the Inquisition to come to Rome with them, and he politely refused because that was a good idea. Bruno, of course, was burned alive in 1600. So you can run the risk of the Inquisition, but basically if you confess, you can be adjudicated because you've committed a sin. You're not a heretic. The difference is these women are considered heretics. And so once you confess to membership in a heretical sect, an explicitly anti-Christian heretical sect, at that point, you can be turned over to the secular authorities, and that's when you get hanged or burned. Some places typically burn, some places hang. Most in England, they do mostly hanging there.
Man, it's heavy.
It's a nightmare. And this is one of the lessons I try to tell people is like the witch trials are a conspiracy theory. There is no data to indicate that any witches were ever existing in Europe. They were just Christians killing Christians. And the nightmare is this is what happens when conspiracy theories get political power and impunity. And this is what we have to have, and there were people during the witch trials. So Johann Weyer, the student of Cornelius Agrippa, came out and said, he was interviewing convicted witches before they were executed. And he was like, what these women share in common is they all are suffering from melancholia, which is a pre-modern version of what we might call mental illness.
Melancholy.
Yeah, melancholy. It's where we get melancholy. But it doesn't just mean in this time. It doesn't mean just sadness. But he noticed that some of them were talking to themselves. Some of them heard voices. Some of them were really, really happy and then really, really sad. He was a physician. He was basically inventing psychiatry by interviewing women. And what he said they in common, they're all poor and they're all suffering from various forms of melancholia. And Johann Weyer said, I think we need to be treating these women, not killing them. And guess what the witch hunter said? You work for the devil.
Kill them too.
Yeah, target him. King James wrote a book on demonology and said Johann Weyer works for the devil. Can you imagine being a regular physician living in mainland Europe, just trying to help people, help defenseless women being targeted for mass murder, and the King of England puts a target on your back?